Welcome back to Good Orderly Direction, Practical Tools of the Bible. Today we're talking about Genesis 41. Joseph is released from prison. I'm your host, Dr. Donnelly Snipes. Now remember in Genesis 40, Joseph encountered the baker and the wine steward, and he pleaded with the wine steward when he was released to remind the Pharaoh that he was still there, that Joseph was still there in jail languishing. But the wine steward forgot about him. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing near the Nile. In front of him, 7 healthy-looking fattened cows climbed up out of the Nile and grazed on the reeds. Just then, 7 other cows, terrible-looking and scrawny, climbed up on the Nile after them and stood beside them on the bank of the Nile. The scrawny cows devoured the 7 healthy-looking fattened cows, and then the Pharaoh woke up. He went back to sleep and had a second dream, in which 7 ears of grain grew on a single stalk. Just then, 7 scrawny ears of grain sprouted and swallowed up the full and well-formed ears. Remember back before Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, one of the things that irked them was he had had dreams about sheaves of grain that were bowing to him. So it's important to see this symbolism carrying through. In the morning, the Pharaoh was disturbed and summoned all of Egypt's religious experts and advisors. He described his dreams to them, but no one could interpret them. Then the chief wine steward spoke to the Pharaoh. Today, I've just remembered my mistake. Oops. There's a Hebrew in the prison that can interpret dreams. The Pharaoh summoned Joseph and said to him, I heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it's not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable response. The Pharaoh recounted his dreams to Joseph. Joseph said to Pharaoh, God has announced to you what he's about to do. It's actually one dream. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy ears of grain represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin and frail cows and scrawny ears of grain are 7 years of famine. It's important to recognize here, again, obviously in the Old Testament, Joseph is ascribing his ability to interpret dreams to God, to the higher being of God. But we can also think about good orderly direction. If Joseph has been given wisdom, has been given knowledge that he's using prudently, truthfully, and earnestly, and telling people out of respect how he interprets the dreams, that all falls in line with love and good orderly direction. So you can see how behaving wisely, behaving prudently, and can help us in our interactions with others. We've recently experienced our own 7 years of prosperity, give or take. Did it bring us closer to or further away from God? One of the things that we tend to see is in times of prosperity, humans tend to get all self-centered and focus on gluttony and pleasure and enjoyment instead of gratitude and prudence and planning for the future. When we are when we are prosperous, we don't have to rely on one another as much, which makes it easier to cast people aside, to not work through our disagreements, to enhance our divisions. Joseph went on and talked to the Pharaoh and said, you should find a wise man and give him authority over the land of Egypt. Then appoint administrators over the land and take 1/5 of all of the produce during the 7 years of abundance. Store the grain under the Pharaoh's control, protecting the food in the cities in preparation for the 7 years of famine, so Egypt won't be ravaged by the famine. Now notice here, he's taking 1/5. That's 20%. Normally, when we talk about tithing, we talk about 10%. But here he's taking 20% during those times of unprecedented abundance because people can afford it. Instead of reveling in the abundance and going, oh, I've got all this excess, let me just live high on the hog, Joseph is saying, no, we need to put some away for a droughty day, if you will. In today's world, even our government maintains something called strategic reserves. And those are supposed to be to help us through times of distress. This advice seemed wise to the Pharaoh and all of his servants. Then the Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all of this known to you, you will be in charge of my kingdom. The 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, and famine covered every part of the land. Joseph sold grain to the Egyptians and every other country from the reserves. So not only was that 20% he gathered from the Egyptians used to feed the Egyptians, but it was also sold to people from other countries. Things we learn from this chapter. It's always prudent to save, but in times of abundance, we should actually save more. Scarcity may not be the direct result of our own actions. Recognize back here, Egypt I'll get to that in a minute. Scarcity may not be the direct result of our own actions, and prior prudence will allow us to endure hardships created by others. God gives and God takes away. How does this apply not only to money and food, but also to energy and friendships? Scripture teaches us that suffering is not random. Our behaviors contribute to our abundance and to our struggles. If we are behaving in a loving, godly fashion, then even during our struggles, we're going to have more support. We're going to have the ability to endure more effectively than if during our times of abundance, we are not behaving in a loving, godly fashion. Egypt was polytheistic, which angered God, who is, by his own account, jealous and wrathful. Joseph is freed and put in a position to be able to help prepare and sustain the Israelites, sustain those on the vine, during the famine. So this is really interesting. We have this Hebrew that's put in charge of things in in Egypt. Egypt is behaving sinfully in the eyes of God in this polytheistic society. So even though the Hebrews are going to experience this famine, Joseph is put in a position where he's able to help sustain them. The Hebrews, we're going to assume, are experiencing effects or consequences potentially because of other people's actions, because of the polytheistic society. So in this case, we're seeing Joseph, again, be put in a position where he's able to sustain the vine, sustain the Israelites, sustain the Hebrews. Yes, he's also sustaining some of the Egyptians. So it's important to look and recognize that just because you don't necessarily like somebody or like what they're doing, sometimes you've got to figure out how to make it work for you. Joseph could have said, oh, you guys are polytheistic, you don't believe in God, no, I don't want to work for you. But he recognized that being in that position within Egypt was part of the greater plan. People in other countries did not save the same way, so they came to Egypt desperate for sustenance. When people aren't able to meet their basic needs, they often submit to and empower anyone who can meet those needs, which even back then and today is often the government. How can you rely on God or good orderly direction to sustain you? How can you use good orderly direction to build community, to build resources, to build supports, so you're not forced to submit to the direction of organizations or entities that go against your beliefs? Remember, Joseph is not only an Israelite in Egypt, but also a freed prisoner. His reputation seems to be cleared. He has resumed the trajectory to power that had begun under Potiphar. Had Joseph been resentful and had a poor attitude when he was sold as a slave, or put in prison, or forgotten about by the wine steward, he probably wouldn't have been able to achieve this. He maintained his humility. He worked earnestly. Even though he had every right to be angry, he chose not to dwell on that anger and instead identify, how can I use my energy to get out of this situation, instead of just sitting here dwelling on resentment. Joseph's earnestness, patience, and meekness allowed him to let love and goodness of God shine through him. He continues in his duties, focusing on how to best be merciful to the people, not focusing on the fact that the Egyptians were prospering from the suffering of others. So I mentioned this a few minutes ago. We can term this maybe radical acceptance. What he's doing in helping the Egyptians, we end up seeing that people are selling their farms, they're selling everything to Egypt just to get enough seed, just to get enough food in order to survive. And the Egyptians are becoming rich off the backs of everybody. However, because of being in the position he's in, he is able to make sure that the Israelites, the Hebrews, are sustained. So it's not a great situation, but he's making the best out of it. This story, or this part of the story, really exemplifies all aspects of good orderly direction. We see Joseph acting prudently. He's earnest in what he does. He doesn't half-ass it. He does his very best, whether it's for the Egyptians, for the Potiphar, for the Hebrews. He's doing his best. He shows respect for the king. He shows respect for everybody, even the people he doesn't agree with. Even the Egyptians who are polytheistic, who don't believe in his God, he shows respect to them. He shows forgiveness to the people who caused him problems. He could still be angry about being put in prison for no reason, but he doesn't. He's like, what's done is done. I need to move on. He shows endurance and courage in his ability to maintain a determined, if not positive, outlook when he's in jail, and his willingness to go before the king and be frank about what he intends to see. He shows compassion towards people. He's truthful about what's getting ready to happen. He could have said, nah, I don't know what that dream means, and not encouraged everybody to save, and then watched the Egyptians just get swallowed up by those scrawny ears of grain. But he didn't. He recognized that that was not the right thing to do. And in all of those things, he was behaving very selflessly. He could have done what he needed to do to enhance his station, and simply in a self-serving way. But he made choices based on what he understood to be the best in the entire situation.